in progress.
All right, welcome to our special presentation with Leila Hassan Howe, speaking about Darcus Howe, her partner, and a civil rights legend. I'm from Black History Walks. We organize walks, talks, and films on Black history each month of the year, all year long, for 15 years and going strong. And on the screen in front of you, you can see some of our coming events, which I'll mention again later on. But basically, we do events like this. This is a talk in this case. We also do physical walks and films all year long, every single month for the last 15 years. So as far as this is concerned, we're going to hear from Leila Hassan Howe. She will speak for maybe a bit over an hour or so. And after she's finished speaking, we will take questions. So we take questions using the chat function after the speaker has finished talking. So once Ms. Howe has finished speaking, we'll take some questions using the chat function. And if you've never used Zoom before, the chat function is at the bottom. And in this case, it's circled in red. So use that chat function to ask questions after the speaker has finished talking. So hopefully you've all heard about the Sarah Parker Remond Centre by now. If you don't know, it's part of U.C.L, which is University College London, which is based in central London in England, or Britain, I should say, possibly. And they study race and racialization. They look at racism and racialization in every single dimension you can think of. And it's headed by a young man called Professor Paul Gilroy, who's authored a couple of books looking at Black history and race. And that is there, or a screenshot from their website. Black History Walks does walks, talks, and films, but I mentioned already, so I'll just skip that for now. So we have 12 different walks in North, East, South, and West London, and they basically take about 2 hours long. And we show people all the Black history in those areas. And we also have a Black History River Cruise, which will be happening again in March when it's a bit warmer. But the cruise goes up and down River Thames, and we show people all the amazing Black history going back thousands of years, which is on the River Thames. Now, we also show films at a place called the BFI South Bank, and we kind of specialize in showing films about Black British civil rights. So some of the films you see here, well, not some, all the films you see we've shown, but we also specialize, as I said before, in looking at struggles for equality with regard to immigration, police, law, healthcare, etc., in this country. So you often hear about civil rights and think about America, but we specialize in showing films about the struggle for equality in this country, going back hundreds of years. And you're going to see some of the films I'm referring to later on, because we're going to have a whole season of films about Darcus Howe this weekend coming. Now, yesterday we had a great event, which was titled British Black Power, Leila Hassan Howe in Conversation. And we had a lot of people signed up for that, a lot of people attended, and that was recorded. So that conversation from yesterday was taped, recorded, documented, and you can find it online at our YouTube channel, which is, here it is right there. So if you go to this website, youtube.com/BlackHistoryWalks, you should see, or you should see all this good stuff here. So there's a couple of hundred videos there from 2 hours long to 5 minutes long, and they cover a whole host of African Caribbean history. We have lectures which were done in collaboration with the Sarah Parker Remond Centre. We have 5-minute interviews, we have 1-minute interviews, we have a number of different kind of videos, short and long, about mostly Black British history, but some of international history as well. And you can find the lecture from yesterday, or the conversation from yesterday, on this website. And this talk today is also going to be recorded, or is being recorded right now. And that talk will be on this very same channel in about 3 days, at the most. 3 days will get there. So if you want to check out that information, you can go to that website. So I mentioned we're going to have a little season of films looking at Darcus Howe and his legacy. So this Friday, physical, in real life, you've got to come to your house to come to this event. Taking place at the BFI South Bank, which is not far from Waterloo Tube Station. We're showing a very rare film from 1969, where Darcus Howe, as obviously a much younger man, took on the might of the Met Police and criticized them for their brutality and for their racism. This is back in 69, when it's rare to have Black people on TV in the first place, far less having them on TV criticizing the powerful institution that's known as the police. So very rare film, very unusual kind of to actually have it shown, be shown physically in real life, in person at the BFI South Bank. You can get your tickets from the BFI, and the website is basically bfi.org.uk. So this is a very rare event happening tomorrow at the BFI in the Blue Room. So today we're going to hear about Darcus Howe from Miss Leila Hassan Howe. And these are just a couple of pictures of him, but we're going to hear, in fact, I should just check. Leila, are you there? Just say hello if you're there, please.
Yes, hi, I'm here. Hello, everybody.
All right, cool. All right, so now we're going to hand over to you, and basically we'll show you some images and you can talk us through those images. So to begin with, the first one is going to be fairly straightforward and simple. This one. So this is these are pictures of Mr. Darcus Howe at different times of his life. So Leila, what can you tell us about these images and what memories did they bring up for you?
So the first image is, first of all, hello everybody, and thank you very much for attending today. The first image is Darcus in the offices of race today. The black and white image, I should say, is Darcus in the offices of race today, probably from judging from his hair, I would say in the early 70s. Darcus took over the editorship of Race Today in December 1973, but we moved to Brixton in a squat in 1974. So this is Darcus at the early stages of his editorship in Race Today. The second one is Darcus in an outfit that I think was made for him by quite a famous tailor, a black tailor, I think, called Boateng, somebody.
Oswald Boateng.
Yes, so he is Oswald Boateng. He is, this is one of the outfits he wore for his groundbreaking television show, Devil's Advocate, of which some of the clips will be shown tomorrow. And this is when he's quite an established television, broadcast and print journalist. And this is later in his life in the 80s.
Okay, great. And this picture, what's happening here, please?
So this is myself with the massive hair, and Barbara Bees, who was a member of the Race Today collective. And in the background are Russell Pierre, who was the deputy editor of West Indian World, which then became The Voice. And I think that's Tony, but I can't remember his second name in the background. So these are, this is a visit from the West Indian World, as it then was, talking to us in Race Today about journalism and what we're doing. And in the background, I think I can see a photo of Orlando Equino. So yes, I think Russell definitely has passed since, but these are the first beginnings of black journalism in Britain, West Indian World, that then became The Voice.
So nearest to the camera is you. That's you right next to the camera with your earrings and the. Is that a velvet dress you're wearing?
Yes, it's a velvet dress I'm wearing. Yes.
Okay. Wow. Cool.
Okay.
All right. And this is at Race Today in Brixton. They've come to see you.
I'm looking at the windows, and I'm not sure if we might have visited them. I'm not sure looking at the windows if that is Race Day offices. I think we might have visited them. We've gone to see them, and I seem to have a notepad and pen in my hand, so I'm probably interviewing them from what I can see. Yes. Okay.
And is this a Neil Kenlock photograph? Because he was a.
Yes. Yeah. This is a Neil Kenlock photograph. Most definitely, this is Neil. Okay.
Cool. All right. Let's move on. Black Dimension 69 February. Can you tell us about this, please?
Yeah, so Darcus, in the early stages of Black Power in Britain, produced two journals, The Hustler, and this was one that he produced called Black Dimension. And like all the kind of journals and pamphlets of the time, as you can see how it's produced, probably on a Gestetner machine, really old machine, which the younger generation will have no clue about. But this is Darcus's first entry really into Black Power politics. And even as early as 69, and you talked about the film, you can see that the issue then, as it remains today, is the issue of Black people in the police, and young Black men in particular in the police. So that's what that is. That's Darcus's, one of Darcus's first publications, called Black Dimension.
And you also mentioned The Hustler. Was The Hustler the journal that was printed in Notting Hill in West London? Was
Yes,
that...
that's right. That's right. I think with Courtney Tulloch and people who were around at that time, Darcus was around at that time.
Okay. And this Black Dimension and The Hustler, how many pages, how many articles would have been in a typical Black Dimension or Hustler, publication?
So I think probably it might have been about 12 pages,
Mm-hmm.
if that. As with all the Black Power papers of that time, it would have had a page that was just our demands. We demand decent education, we demand decent housing, we demand a fair trial to be tried by our peers. Many of the demands at that time were taken from the Black Panthers in the United States.
Yeah.
And so we would have had a page, all the Black Power newspapers had a page with what our demands were to get equal rights and justice within Britain. And then it would have been news stories from the Caribbean, from Africa, from Southern Africa, as well as what was going on in Britain as well.
And these journals or pamphlets, would they be given away free on street corners, or would they be sold? How did they get distributed?
So I used to sell Black Voice at Brixton Market and Ridley Road Market and Shepherd's Bush Market, and it was like £1, but not £1 as you know today. So we used to sell them. We used to sell them and talk to people, and we were young militants, and we would talk about how Black people are oppressed in Britain, and we have to stand up for our rights. And I remember myself and still my friend Jean Ambrose, we would go together and stand at the top of markets, dressed up in African clothes, selling newspapers to people who would pass by. And we were young women, so a lot of the people who bought the papers were young men, I must say. But we would talk to anybody and everybody about what we believed in.
All right. So as far as Black Dimension and The Hustler is concerned, Darcus is the editor, publisher, journalist.
Yeah, Darcus is producing and editing and publishing Black Dimension. The Hustler, I think it was probably with somebody called Courtney Tulloch, but that I'm not sure. I didn't know Darcus at this time at all. This is the part of Darcus's life that I don't meet Darcus until 1970, really meet him until 73. I meet him in 71, but it's only with the Race Today Collective that I'm aware of Darcus. So this is way before my time.
Okay, cool. So here's an article from the Justice Gap about the Mangrove 9, and if I just press this button here, so people can read the text while you're speaking, but I think people might know about the Mangrove 9 and that Darcus Howe was a major figure in that trial, in that situation. So what would you like to tell us about the Mangrove 9?
So I think for the Mangrove 9, for young Black people like myself, who were not only for young people, I think for the Black community generally, the Mangrove 9 really is a watershed moment for us, because this is the time when we take on the British state and we win. Up until then, there'd been lots of campaigns, lots of articles about what was going on with the Black community and the police, and there were court cases, but invariably in the court cases, the Black defendants would be found guilty. Ian MacDonald, who died last year, he spoke at an event we had a couple of years ago at the House of Commons, and he says that the standard practice for barristers when they met Black defenders was to say to them, quite frankly, you don't stand a chance, just plead guilty. And he said he met the first defendants who began to say to him, I don't care what you're saying, I need you to know I didn't do it, and I want you to stand up for me. And what was important about the Mangrove 9 is not only did they stand up, but two of the defendants, Althea, the lead Black Panthers at that time, and Darcus, defended themselves. And they took on state power, exposed the police for their lies, and persuaded the jury, and in most cases they were found not guilty. So that this is really kind of a watershed moment in Black British history. And as we know now, immortalized by Steve McQueen's drama, for which the leading character, one of the leading characters, Malachi Kirby, got the BAFTA award for portraying Darcus. So we're really pleased that that happened, but you can't underestimate the impact that had on the community at that time in Britain.
And if I remember correctly, Darcus Howe himself at this trial was encouraged to plead guilty, and then I think I read that he just took his papers from the lawyer and just ran off with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the lawyers then really, the way the ruling class lawyers, we know most of the lawyers then were very upper class people. And he just told Darcus, his advice to Darcus was, you know, you don't stand a chance to plead guilty. And Darcus just took his papers up and walked out and said no, and then took the decision to defend himself.
Alongside Leila, oh no, not Leila, sorry, Alfie Jones-LeConte, who was
yes, that's right,
his colleague.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, do you know how much time they were looking at if they were convicted of these alleged offences? Do you know roughly what kind of prison time that they might have?
I think 15 years. I think for a fray, because the serious charge was a fray. So what people might not realise is it took a year to bring those charges. At first, they weren't being charged with very serious offences at all. And then a year later, the decision of the British state was that they had to make an example of them. And the charge of a fray, I think, carried up to 15 years at that time. So they were looking at very long prison sentences if they were convicted.
So that would have been very intimidating to think that if you try to defend yourself, you might get 15 years in a prison. That must have been a very courageous move to actually try to defend yourself.
I think though, but you need to understand the moment in which that took place, because you've got the Panthers in America and they're already demanding that we should be tried by our peers, that we started to demand black juries. And there were a lot of political campaigns and legal campaigns in the United States, which were very inspirational to us in England. So there was very much a spirit of you have to fight back regardless of the consequences. And that was a spirit, I think, that was also in the Mangrove 9.
And I suppose around this time, you also have Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale and Angela Davis all being on trial for things they never actually did. So you're in a similar sort of position, I suppose.
Absolutely, absolutely. And fighting back though, you know, not standing for it.
Yeah, okay. So here's a fairly well-known photograph. Can you tell us a bit about this, please?
Well, there's Althea in the front there. I can see Althea talking. This is them gathering for the demonstration on All Saints Road. Yeah. Looking at the photograph, the Mangrove would be on the left.
That's right.
All Saints Road became a kind of front line, the way Brixton had a front line. All Saints Road also was a front line where you could just pop by, you could be in a car or get off a bus and walk there, and you would just find black people gathered. You could have a conversation, you would eat some food. And this is on All Saints Road. I can also see Althea's husband, also a member, in the kind of striped top. That's Eddie LeQuant, there in the demonstration. But again, I have to say, I was not active at the time of the Mangrove demonstration. I meet Darcus after the Mangrove. So this is something I'm reading about, but all of us in different Black Power organizations knew about the Mangrove, and the Mangrove was very, very important to us, very important.
And I'm thinking, well, you weren't involved in this demo, but you were definitely involved in the Grosvenor Square demo in '75. Yes. And I'm just wondering, practically, when it comes to producing these posters or these banners or these placards here, how was that done? Did people actually agree the slogans before they wrote them, or did just anybody do what they want to do, or how did it work?
No, but I think because the way we're talking to each other, we kind of know what we want to say on the slogans. So some people would be more creative. Some people would come up with some really creative, funny one. I mean, Black Power is going to get your mama, the one we can see there. That comes from the United States. That was quite a common slogan. But the others, you know, Black Power, People's Power, that was something we said, even though we weren't on the Mangrove demonstration. So some of them are what I would call currency within the Black Power movement anyway. And then you do have individuals who do get creative. I mean, Barbara B's the photo isn't here, but of course she actually gets a pig's head from the butchers and carries a real pig's head, because at that stage we called the police pigs. So there was both kind of invention as well as the kind of currency of language that was going on in the Black Power movement at that time.
Yeah, and I can also see a Black Panther flag there in the center.
Yes.
And I think there were Black Panthers in Nottingham, Black Panthers in Brixton. Is that right?
Yeah. So Althea was from Brixton, and she's in the front there. And they came from the Black Panther movement in Brixton. The Panthers were based mainly in Brixton and in North London. But she comes down to the Grove regularly, speaks to Frank regularly. And of course, as the film shows, she's quite key in organizing the demonstration as well.
Okay, great. This is a screenshot from our book that Black History Walks was instrumental in creating, because we basically took the, we have a Black History Walk in Notting Hill. So alongside Pearson, we took information from our Black History Walk in Notting Hill and made it into a school textbook. So now, from this year onwards, kids in school are going to learn about the Mangrove Nine, about Darcus Howe and Frank Critchlow, and many other aspects of Black history in Notting Hill that they would never study at GCSE before. So that picture you can see there is in the book. And also, I think this picture is also in the GCSE textbook, and it's the first time it's ever been done. So some of the things that Leila's mentioning are now going to be studied at GCSE level in schools.
This is really good. This is really good. This is what we want.
All right. So this is a video clip now from 75. And we're going to see Darcus discussing human rights, civil rights in Brixton, and the police, of course.
Mr. Howe, as the editor of a magazine called Race Today, you have recently published a document in which you say, "We are uncompromisingly against mugging. We see the mugging activity as a manifestation of powerlessness, a consequence of being without a wage." Could you tell me what you mean by that?
Well, firstly, the statement is in response to what has been paraded in the press and by Scotland Yard on the question of the increase in crime among unemployed youth. The young people have begun the rebellion, refusing to work. They have received very little support from other sections of the population, as a consequence of which they must find money by these means. We say we are against those means, not because we are moralists, not because we are religious freaks, but precisely because mugging involves loss of life and liberty, and a continuing attack upon that section of the Black community, police brutality, prison brutality, a whole wastage of human creativity. That is why we were against it.
Could I also put it to you that you are yourself rather patronizing of many of your fellow members of your community in the way in which you refer to people who work on, say, London transport, for instance? Your phrase for it is shit work. Aren't many people, both white and black, very proud to work for organizations like that?
I have met very few Black people who do not come home and complain in the presence of their children about the mercilessness of the exploitation they suffer, about the difficulties of the job, about the abuse of white passengers to them, and the young Blacks listen to them in the home. Now they might come on television and say something else for public relations purposes because they feel they are not strong enough to speak the truth. That's another question. But young Blacks who have grown up in small flats and single rooms with their parents are well educated without having to work there as to what kind of job it is, except the education that drives them to that conclusion is really given by the parents who come from work every day, and the young Blacks see a certain kind of person which they would not like to reproduce.
Yeah. So that was an old clip from 75, what was now called ITV. And this is, of course, this is after the Mangrove trial. And what can you tell us about this, Leila? Because this, I presume this is fairly controversial at the time.
So one of the things I smile at, although I'm pleased about, is how Darcus is revered, and Darcus has now kind of gone into icon status. But when Darcus was alive, particularly in his early stages, when he was very militant and made a very, very radical stand, a lot of people thought Darcus was really a huge troublemaker, and that somebody who, you know, you had to avoid. And, you know, if you believe that, you know, we had to be quiet and acquiesce in order to get on, then you weren't really pleased with the way Darcus was always so militant and so hostile. But Darcus never backed down. And this was controversial for one reason. I think the Steve McQueen film Uprisings that people may have seen would have seen that the white media made a great deal about mugging. and young black people who were muggers, and they would carry out these raids saying they were looking for muggers. And what Race Today did, and this is a clip from in the offices of Race Today, as you can see, is we said, rather than just superficially look at, oh, these young black youth are involved in crime, they should be locked up, you needed to have an approach to ask the why. Why was this happening? And what Darcus is pointing out here is that because their economic circumstances, because they do not have money, and because they're young, they want money, then they're resorting to mugging. And that was quite a thing to say, because he didn't side with everybody to say that they were wrong and they should be locked up. And throughout his career, Darcus's view of the unemployed and the relationship of black unemployed people to the working class and to the middle class has always been something that he's taken a very strong stand on. And that comes from his background in Trinidad, where he grew up with many unemployed people because of how the society was organized economically. There were a whole load of young men who did not work. So he had an understanding of that. And this is him telling Thames Television on a statement that Race Today issues not only in its journal, but we produced a leaflet which we gave out, which said that mugging is a consequence of the fact that young black men do not have wages, have no money, and economically, in order to live, they mug. That was very controversial. And
at this time, I suppose Darcus Howe is famous enough that Thames TV is going to find him to ask him questions. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that, yes. I mean, by now, Darcus became famous, really, became to real public attention because of the Mangrove trial. There's no doubt about it. When Darcus came to the Institute of Race Relations to do research in 71, when I worked there, 71, maybe 72. When he walked in the door, the whole of the Institute was Darcus Howe has arrived, Darcus Howe has arrived. He had a kind of celebrity status from the Mangrove and his statements around the Mangrove, and the fact, of course, that he just did not back down. So he's known by the media and by the population in general as someone who will take a stand which is probably quite radical and quite militant from what many people were taking at the time.
And for those of us, or those people who were born in the late 90s, early 2000s, can you just remind us as to what TV is like for Black people watching TV when it comes to Black representation, Black imagery on TV in the 1970s? Can you tell us a bit about that, if you remember?
Well, there wasn't any. I mean, unlike now with, you know, computers and laptops and all of our pads and things, the one thing is the television was something that everybody watched, which of course isn't completely the case now. And ITV was the popular channel, and BBC, popular but more serious. But we all went home every evening and we watched television. So television had huge viewership figures at that time. But the other thing, of course, was that we were an immigrant population that was just coming into its own, had not established itself in arts or culture or in the media. So to see a Black person on television was extremely rare. And then when you're seeing a Black person who's strong like Darcus and militant like Darcus, that's almost mind-blowing.
Because at this time, you still have the black and white minstrel show on TV and Tarzan at the same time.
Well, you have black and white minstrel, you have Tarzan, you have sitcoms, which are really quite derogatory of Black people. You know, Black people are the butt of people's jokes. There was something, Alf Garnett, who used to moan and groan about immigrants and people coming here. And that was a kind of comedy. Love Thy Neighbor, I think was called. There was Love Thy Neighbor. But anyway, Black people were not portrayed as people who stood up for themselves. That's for sure. We would be the butt of jokes, or we would be, as you say, the minstrels, the singing and dancing, laughing minstrels.
And I should explain that the black and white minstrels were actually white people who would pretend to be Black, put on Black makeup, put on big Afro wigs and happy smiles, and go on stage and still sing songs about how they missed working on the slave plantation. Literally, they would sing songs about they want to go back and work on the slave plantation.
Yeah,
those are not aware of it.
And they would white up their lips to make big lips, as if, you know, the stereotype of the Negro was what they looked like.
Mr. Howe.
Okay. So here we have issue of Race Day from 75, the Caribbean Revolt gunning for a wage. You see some images in the front there. What's happening here, please, Leila?
So what's happening here is that in 75, you're having a lot of mass uprisings in the West Indies, in the Caribbean. And these are images from Dominica, from Guyana, from, I'm not sure where the one at the bottom is. It might be Trinidad, 1970. So this is showing that the Caribbean Revolt is showing that there are all these movements in the Caribbean islands, to oppose the puppets that had been put there since colonialism. So Darcus is a young man who leaves Trinidad at 18. Many of his age, he had seen his parents fight for the British to leave the West Indies. And the hope was that when the British left the West Indies, life would be better for ordinary people. And of course, this was not the case. Many of the people who took power in the West Indies just adopted all the colonial structures, the colonial system, the colonial education system, the colonial police system. And that meant that the ordinary people in the West Indies, real lives did not change that much. Instead of having a white person in power, you had a black person in power. But there'd been a really huge movement of demonstrations throughout the Caribbean to get the British out, demanding what we call independence. But independence didn't bring the promise that the population hoped for. And so that's why when Britain, wanting to rebuild itself after the war, made the call out for Labour to come and help rebuild Britain, thousands, hundreds and thousands of people from the West Indies came here in order to seek a better life. But those that remained in the 70s are still fighting against that colonial system that's left behind. And that's why this is called the Caribbean in Revolt. Gunning for a Wage is about the spaghetti siege, which was mentioned in the Black Power documentary, when 3 young black men go to the spaghetti house to rob it and then hold people hostage. And all manner of people went down there to negotiate with them and to get them released. But it was Race Today's stand again, which was different from everybody else, was that this really wasn't about politics. It was the young men who'd gone down there wanted the money, and that they'd taken guns this time to get money, to get money in order for them to want to live the lives that they wanted to. So that's why that's called Gunning for a Wage.
Can I just check that? I mean, Darcus is from Trinidad. Stokely Carmichael was in Trinidad as well. Is it true that they knew each other at school growing up in Trinidad?
No, they lived just roads away from each other. Darcus knew Stokely, most definitely knew Stokely, and knew Stokely's family as well. And then Stokely, of course, migrates to the United States, and Darcus comes to England. But no, they knew each other well.
Yeah, and I'm sure that Stokely Carmichael came to London in the 60s and gave a speech at the Roundhouse in Camden.
He did. That was called, it was called the Dialectics of Liberation. Right, and there was this huge conference, and Stokely, I mean, people just flocked to hear Stokely. I mean, now when you look back, you can see why. But Stokely's nickname, Darcus used to call him Star Michael, not because he was a star in every sense of the word. But of course, after that conference, the British government then ban him, don't they? They remove him and tell him he can't come back to Britain. But he was one of the leading advocates of Black power and of Black independent movement in the United States.
Okay. So Race Today 77, Grunwick gates the entry to unionization, Caribbean political prisoners.
Okay, so this is quite a famous strike. These are the Asian women led by Jabin Desai, who go on strike at a photo processing factory, demanding that they have union rights and equal pay. Now, there's one thing that's important to mention around our struggles of the 70s, is that our struggles on the factory floor were not only against employers who were paying differential wages between Black and Asian people and the white worker. So you could work side by side with a white worker and get less money, doing exactly the same job. That was one fight. But the other fight was that the union supported those white workers. And many of the unions did not want Black workers or Asian workers to join the union. And so our fight was to get union to get the union to recognize us and fight for our rights, which they were supposed to do, as well as fight for our rights against the employers. And this is one of the very, very famous strikes. And it's famous primarily because it's the first time that white working class with Arthur Scargill and the miners actually joined these Asian women on the picket line. And it's the first time you see a white working class, which up until then had been quite hostile to Black and Asian workers, believing they'd come to undercut their wages or take their jobs, and also were just plain racist. But this is the first time you see a large amount of white working class men join Asian women in their fight for equal rights and for equal pay at the factory gates.
And I've just realized that the date for this is 77, which means it's just 1 year after the Race Relations Act of 1976, which people had to fight for, lobby for, argue for, and then it's passed in 76, but it takes a long time for the law to get into effect. So
yes, yeah. So I mean, then up until then, it was legal to discriminate. It was legal to be racist. There was no sanction on you for any of this.
So this is 76 now, and it's the Black Parents Movement marching
for George Lindo.
Oh
no, hold on. This is Hackney. This is Haringey. So this is, I must say, the little boy in the front with the placard saying Black parents and students demand Haringey public inquiry into police violence. That's Darcus's son, Darcus. That's
really?
Darcus Bees. Yeah,
oh, wow.
That's Darcus Bees, his son.
Wow.
And I recognize some of the other people on that march too. One of the people holding the banner is quite a famous artist called Leslie Wills. So there's the Black Parents Movement and the Black Students Movement started in North London, and we were in alliance with Race Today. And one of their big issues was around the amount of policing in and around schools, and also around racism in education. So this is the demonstration that's protesting this. And what we're showing is that it's parents who are on the move for the rights of their children. And this again is quite a new phenomenon in Britain at that time.
Yeah, I'm just thinking 76, it says here kind of what the BBC did not say. Is that referencing the kind of so-called riots? Because I'm sure I've seen Darcus Howe speak about how he was attacked by the police in his own, called a whole bunch of racist names in 76 or something like that.
Probably in 76. Well, there are lots of stories about Darcus and the police, which we'll come to a bit later on. Some of them are quite funny as well, which we can talk about a bit later.
Okay, cool.
But I think that was around Cliff McDaniel. So by now Darcus has made a name for himself, because Race Today is consistently coming out as a journal that's a vehicle and a voice for the Black community in Britain. He's invited by more mainstream press to write articles, and this is Darcus writing for the Evening Standard. I'm sorry that the date seems to be blacked out, but the important thing, it says June 95. The important thing about this is that the Evening Standard, unlike today, so we had television and we had newspapers, and people read newspapers, and the one paper we all read every evening was the Evening Standard. When you picked up the Evening Standard, and it was a really widely read, very popular paper. And Darcus is invited to have a column in this paper, which he does for a few years. And of course, here we can see that he's talking about the first Black trade union leader in Britain, the leader of the Transport and General Workers Union. I think it's now called Unite. And Bill was under threat. And so Darcus is saying, you know, can a Black person, like a Black man like Bill Morris, remain at the top there?
And this is a time when you had to buy the paper, you know, because like people,
oh yes,
you had to buy it for like 20 pence or whatever, but nowadays you get it for free.
Oh yeah. No, you bought your Standard on your way home from work. That was pretty standard practice for a large section of the population.
And the article seems to mention the fact that Bill Morris had an agreement with his white colleague that the white colleague would not run.
And then he did. Yeah.
He did.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a stitch up.
It was, yes. And Jack Dromey is now an MP. I mean, he's in the Labour Party. Yeah. It's Harry's husband.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So yes, so again, this is Darcus's column in the Standard, and he's having a go at Tony Blair, because what he's pointing out is that when we grew up, the Labour Party was really a very democratic institution. And he's talking about how Tony Blair kind of became more like a presidential style leader, and he's calling it Mr. Blair's new party, and basically saying that that's a retrograde step. So again, this is the theme really which we've talked about in terms of his statement on mugging and the gunning for the wage, which is saying that the danger of the Black community itself turning on its young Black people and alienating young Black people means that there will be a real division within the Black community, which, you know, if it was another forum, we could talk about currently how that's being played out. But he's saying danger, and the danger that, you know, that it lies in that young Blacks will just become really police fodder, and will be, just as we can see today, their futures will just be within the criminal justice system if we don't as a community do something about what's going on with them.
I'm just realizing, because the date there is 1995, and that is of course just a couple of years after 1993 when Stephen Lawrence gets stabbed death at a bus stop, and this is while the campaign for justice for him is still going forward. They have not actually got to the public inquiry stage yet. They're still trying to get justice at that stage.
Yeah. Right.
Is that you?
This is me. Yeah, this is me with other members of the collective. I can see Loreen there.
Are you dancing?
Well, we were, yeah. I mean, we were dancing, yeah. So we're dancing and chanting. This is a picket line. Darcus has defended himself against the barrister at Notting Hill Station, and the police were always picking on Darcus. And outside of the Mangrove, while he was editor of Race Today, Darcus was arrested 6 times. But by now in Race Today, we kind of have a system where Darcus is arrested and we know what we do. We have local lawyers on our side, Ian McDonald, Gareth Pearce, who's the very famous lawyer who does a lot of the immigration cases and did the Irish cases, of course. We then have a campaign, we leaflet, we picket the courts, and then Darcus would be found not guilty. Either the magistrate would throw it out or whatever. So when we went to Knightsbridge on this occasion, we just thought it's the same routine. This isn't Knightsbridge, but on this occasion, the judge looked at Darcus and said, Mr. Howe, you are a very arrogant man, and I'm going to sentence you to 3 months in prison. I can't tell you the effect that this had on all of us when we realized that this time we hadn't won, that Darcus in fact was going to jail. So Darcus is sent to Pentonville prison for 3 months. And of course, for a minute, we're just like, my goodness, this is terrible. I get a message from Darcus's lawyer, Ian McDonald, that Darcus wants to see me in jail and that I must smuggle him in some brandy. And in those days, you could do things like that. So I went to Pentonville and I smuggled some brandy under my jacket, in my armpit, and went into the visiting area where he was. And Darcus is in denims, in a denim shirt and in the prison denims. He's in prison uniform. And of course, that breaks my heart. And I look at him and I get all tearful. And he looks at me and he says, well, why are you crying? And I said, well, because you're in jail and this is just so terrible, Darcus. And he says, but you know what you have to do. Surely all of you know what you have to do. And then I stopped crying and immediately I understood what he was saying. And I knew basically we had to get him out of there. So we ran a huge campaign, national and international campaign. And this is us outside the Royal Courts of Justice. And we're chanting to free Darcus and walking up and down, screaming at anybody who passed by. And the little girl you see there is Darcus's daughter, Taifa, who's on the picket line as well. And we were successful. Darcus tells the story that when he left Pentonville that day, the prison warden told him, take all your things because you're not coming back. And he was released after 2 weeks. So this is the picket line, and you can see what the pickets say, that self-defense is no offense, because it was him defending himself against the barrister who was going to hit him with an umbrella. And this is us later on with great jubilation when Darcus walks out of the court a free person. But I have to say that once you get the blow, we were always then on the offensive, because we were always determined never to be victims. Darcus was quite clear in his early editorial that he called it from victims to protagonists, that we would not be victimized by racism or by anybody. So that's why you see me singing and dancing outside, demanding that they release him, which they did.
You remember what year was this, please?
I could check for you. I would think it's 75. If Michael's listening, Michael will put it up in the chat which year it is, but I think it is. It's either 75 or 77.
Oh, and just to ask a stupid question, I just want to be clear for the audience listening. He was arrested 6 times. Was this harassment by the police?
Oh, absolute harassment. Absolute harassment. No question about it. Sometimes, I mean, one of the arrests is very funny. If I could tell the story, it's a story to tell later because it's around Carnival. But the Mangrove it was the Queen's Jubilee, and the Mangrove decided that they were not going to celebrate the Queen's Jubilee. They were going to have African liberation celebrations. So they put all the flags for African liberation from Mozambique, Guinea, South ANC flags outside, got police permission, and they said their street party was not going to be a Jubilee party for the Queen. It was going to be a party to celebrate African liberation. And the police agreed. The police agreed that they could hold this celebration for African liberation. But during the celebration, and Frank Critchlow was there, and it's on All Saints Road, and the whole Grove community's out there. During the celebration, 2 officers arrived drunk and Darcus has arranged for special ice cream to come down from Camden Town called Marine Ices. I mean, it was really a big affair. Anyway, the police roll up drunk and start being very abusive, whereupon Darcus arrests them, and he carries out a citizen's arrest. And he arrests Inspector Hunt, as it was, and arrests him and puts him in the basement of the Mangrove. And in those days, there were things called citizens' arrests. So Darcus arrests Inspector Hunt, puts him in the basement of the Mangrove. He says to his friend, Wappy King, who's one of the guys who's around the Mangrove, he's our prisoner and we're going to treat him like any other prisoner. So make him a cup of tea and give him a sandwich. Darcus then rings Scotland Yard himself and says, I've arrested Inspector Hunt for being drunk and disorderly, believing like he's some kind of hero. The next thing he knows, a whole van load of police, they used to have these green buses, pulls up. When Wappy King sees all the police, he jumps through the window and leaves Darcus, and Darcus is arrested and charged himself. But by the time that gets to court, goes through the magistrates and then goes to court, the magistrate looks at Darcus and says, Darcus, I would like to give you one piece of advice. Do not negotiate with the police when you're having these parties, and freeze him. So that's the kind of, that gives you a sense of the tempo of how we lived, and Darcus's courage and the fact that, you know, he would stand up to anybody. I mean, he just arrested an inspector and locked him in the basement of the Mangrove.
So again, to link into the American situation, I know for a fact that one of the state policies to disrupt Black Panthers in America was to arrest their leaders over and over again and thereby drain their money when it came to legal defenses. Did that sort of thing happen to you as well? Did you have some sort of special relationship where you got free legal advice? Because if you get arrested 6 times, you have to pay for a lot. That can make...
No, all of it was free. All of it. Remember, Darcus was legally trained himself, so Darcus himself knew the law. But the barristers that we had, money never came into it, not ever. In terms of the people who defended us and also defended in some of our campaigns. But what it did do was drain us, because if you're concentrating on fighting court cases, you can't deal with your activism, bring out your magazine, you know, fight your corner for all the things that you're doing. Yeah. So that this is a way of trying to drain Darcus and sidetrack Darcus, because by now he is a huge public figure in Britain and a very radical public figure in Britain, and it was a way of undermining him in that role.
Right. Is this Darcus in the picture on the left-hand side?
No, that Darcus is in the next picture. If the next one to this is Darcus. So this is us on Ladbroke Grove. If you show the next one as well, and then I can talk to both of them. That's Darcus. So that this is that's Darcus there with the flag. So we are part of the girl there. You can see this young lady is Darcus's eldest daughter, Tamara. We are now very active in the carnival movement. We're part of the fight to keep carnival on the streets of Notting Hill. The fight to take carnival off the streets is being led by the police. The police get up a petition and go to all the houses within the area and get them to sign a petition to say they don't want carnival on the streets of Notting Hill. And they then take that to the council as proof that the neighbours, the neighbourhood does not want carnival in Notting Hill. So we're fighting against the police who want carnival off the streets. And at the same time, Darcus becomes chairman of the Carnival Development Committee, and they put out their own program and policy of what they stand for, and have an organisation to show that it's a serious force. But the other thing is that we do bring out our own carnival band. And our first carnival band was celebrating the forces who were fighting against Portuguese colonialism in Africa, the last 3 remaining colonies of Mozambique, Angola, and Guinea-Bissau, all of whom were in armed warfare against the Portuguese who were still ruling their countries. So our band was called Forces of Victory. And what we did was we built a polystyrene tank over a car. So that's what you're seeing there. You're seeing the tank that we built. You can see it's over a car because you can see the number plate. And then these are the carnival players with our full rifles and guns. But what we're representing and what the next picture represents is the forces of victory in these countries, all of whom were successful in finally kicking the Portuguese out. And as you can say, it's Race Today there. So that's our first carnival band. And there's Darcus waving his flag. Darcus was a carnivalist until the day he died, really. Absolutely believed in carnival. We went to carnival every single year and played mass in the end with the Mangrove. And Race Day brought out its own band for 3 or 4 years, and we were successful in winning Band of the Year. So that's what those photos show.
And is it right that one of Darcus's daughters, Tamara, the one in the picture there, she now works for the BBC?
No, not now. She doesn't work for the BBC. She did. She was controller of I think financial controller. I mean, she was very senior in the BBC, but she no longer works for the BBC. She left the BBC, but she did work for the BBC, yes.
Okay.
But in a very, very, very senior position.
Bradford 77, Police Court Justice. There's rarely been a case in which I've been involved in which the prosecution evidence has been such a shambles. Ian MacDonald, barrister for the Arndale 2.
Yes.
What's that about?
So this is Race Today. CLR James, who we'll talk about later, Darcus's uncle, always said to Darcus and to us that the Black community and London is not England. England is different to London. So we made links mainly through court cases with people in Bradford, and they produced a journal called Bradford Black, which was very close to Race Today, and we used to go to Bradford regularly. So this is the Bradford Black. As you can see, it costs 10p, and they're again on the issue of the police are campaigning for 2 people who've been arrested in the mall. Now, one of the things I found out then and still exists today, if you go to places like Liverpool, Leeds, Birmingham, you don't find many Black people in and around the town centres. They're in the Black communities outside of these town centres. And the Arndale Centre was the big shopping centre in Bradford, and these 2 young Black men had gone there, and the police had picked on them, arrested them, and basically charged them. And so Ian MacDonald, who was was Barbara Beese's barrister in the Mangrove case and was shown in the Queen, but throughout his life had a relationship with Race Today and supported all the cases that we had. So he is the barrister in this case of the Arndale 2.
Okay.
So this is the book fair. Race Today, together with New Beacon Books and Bogle Overture Books, which is now Walter Rodney Books, put on, this is the book fair. And this is where we invite publishers from all over the world, radical publishers. It's called a book fair of radical Black and Third World books. So that explains exactly who we want to participate. And apart from all of them coming with their publications to sell, we have a festival. And we have a kind of central theme. And here we can see that the theme is 20 years after Nkrumah's taken power in Ghana. And that's Kwame Nkrumah, who ran a very successful campaign against British colonialism to free Ghana. C.L.R. James has written a very important book on Nkrumah and Ghana. And so this reflects on where West Africa, where Ghana is 20 years after Nkrumah. So yes, and so that's what that shows. And you can see one of the other titles is the struggle for Southern Africa, because at that time, the big issue for many of us in the Black community was around apartheid in Southern Africa and the freedom for Southern Africa. So
Yeah,
that's
Mandela's still in prison at this time, 86.
Yes,
still
he
inside.
is. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And what's happening here?
So here's a picture of Darcus speaking at one of the book fair events. I'm looking at it because I'm recognizing some of the people in the photo. I can see Gus John is there behind Darcus. And the first person you can see on the left is a guy called David Abdullah from the Oil Food Workers Trade Union in Trinidad. So this would be one of the many discussion forums that we're having. Darcus is speaking. I can't remember what the subject was at that stage, but that's one of the book fair festivals, and you can see the platform there of men and women interested in what he's saying, and that's what we did. We had lots of meetings and discussions like this. Is
this a Islington Town Hall?
Yes, this would be, it's either Islington or Lambeth. So if that's the first one, then it's Islington, but we also held them at Brixton. And I'm only saying it might be Brixton because of the wooden paling, but it might well be Islington Town Hall as well.
So you basically try and move it around London so it was always in the same place.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. It's 86. Tyra Henry. Who's to blame?
Yes.
Who's Tyra Henry?
Tyra Henry was one of these tragic cases, and you may remember there were a couple of cases where young Black children who were in the social care system, and then there would be issues around their neglect and abuse within the Black family. So that is what that's a very topical story, and we're saying again with it was her family or it was the social workers. We're trying to delve into who really is to blame for the death of this person. And then again, you can see this is a photo from South Africa. We're now in 86, and this is around people who've been detained in South Africa, and also of course the issue of Haiti, which still remains today. Haiti's in the news, but we were talking about Haiti. So then and then of course Darcus on cricket. Yeah,
I've just remembered because Lambeth is home to Shirley Oaks, I think, and Alex Wheatle speaks about the abuse which took place at Shirley Oaks, and it was a massive scandal of child abuse within Lambeth, if I remember correctly.
That's correct, yeah, massive.
Okay. James Baldwin.
Right.
88.
So yeah, so James Baldwin had meant a lot to me personally, because he was the one writer when I was young, growing up in East London, surrounded by a lot of racism. It was James Baldwin's literature and books that I would say kind of really helped me to resolve where I stood on the issue of race and racism, and turn me into the kind of radical that I became. And when he died, we wanted to organize a tribute, and by then Race Today is so well known nationally and internationally. To get Maya Angelou to come to us, I can tell you it was just a telephone call. We called Maya and we asked Maya, because we knew that Maya Angelou and James Baldwin had been very, very close friends, really close friends. And so we asked Maya if she would come over, and she came over to Brixton Town Hall, as you can see, and Kaz Phillips, who was also had written about Baldwin and was close to Baldwin, and other people holding James Baldwin undoubtedly was Maya Angelou, and Maya Rackon talked to the audience with all her different stories, her life, her struggle in the civil rights movement, and very funny as well, very, very funny, and funny stories about James Baldwin, who she called Jimmy. So that was one of the really wonderful things that we were able to do. And it's done under Creation for Liberation. Creation for Liberation is the kind of artistic and cultural arm of Race Today, which was set up by Linton. And this is the organization that's part of Race Today, but concentrates on theatre, music, poetry, and culture. And so it was the cultural arm that put the tribute to James Baldwin on. It was absolutely packed. We couldn't get everybody into the town hall. Then it wasn't like now, there wasn't the health and safety restrictions. Whoever you could get in lined up against the wall, sitting on the floor, sitting at the side of the stage, then you could do that. So it was a really momentous evening.
I'm just interested because I know that for some groups, getting hold of venues was very difficult if you're a Black group. So I'm thinking, how are you able to get hold of Brixton Town Hall?
So at that time, because Brixton is being run by a radical council, some people may remember if a very big council. And so we have a relationship with the council, and anything we wanted from the council, we got. Have those difficulties because they supported Race Today. They were radicals who supported the Black struggle. So we didn't have that difficulty at all.
Is that the time of Heather Rabat's being in charge at the time?
No, Heather comes in a bit later. I'm talking about the days of Red Ted, and Linda Bellos was a councillor. You had some real radicals in Lambeth Council at the time.
Okay, cool. Now you got two pictures here. One is of you at the bottom, and you tell us what we're seeing here, please.
So first of all, you'll see myself and Darcus in the offices of Race Today. By now, we've moved from the first squat of 74 Shakespeare Road. We've broken through the doors of the interconnecting doors, and we've moved into 165 Railton Road. So we now have much better offices. And it's a bit difficult, isn't it? Because there's Darcus working and there's me sitting with a bottle of drink. So perhaps we won't say too much about that one then. But basically that's us in the offices of Race Today at the same time. The photos have just been put one after the other. The other one, of course, is the really wonderful and historic figure of C.L.R. James. C.L.R. James is Darcus's great uncle. C.L.R. James is the inspiration for the journal Race Today. He's the person who talks to Darcus about a small organization around a magazine and the impact that could have within the Black community. So he's basically sort of our inspiration. And in his later years comes to live with Race Today, and we help look after C.L.R., who until the day he died maintained his West Indian palate. He would ask for saltfish, was one of his favorites. Cuckoo, he loved cuckoo and fish. That was another one. Used to ask for Johnny cakes, which of course are bakes. But that's one of the joys of my life, to have known C.L.R. James and to have conversations with him. And he would just talk to him whenever you left C.L.R. He had always revealed something about yourself to you that you didn't know just by the questions he asked you. That really was a whole really unique way of approaching people. He'd ask you a series of questions and you're answering them. And then when you go away, you realize that in your answers, he's made you think about yourself and what you're doing. So very much so.
And just to be clear for the people who may not be aware of C.L.R.'s background, C.L.R. James is a legend in the 30s and 40s. He wrote the Black Jacobin. He was involved in the League of Colored People. He worked with people like Dr. Hal Moody and Paul Robeson, and he was a literal giant. And basically, he was giving Race Today kind of mentoring or support and advice, etc.
Mm-hmm. And with George Padmore and with Nkrumah, he used to go to Ghana and talk to Nkrumah before independence. I mean, a huge Pan-Africanist, and of course, as you said, a literary giant as well. His book, The Black Jacobins, and his other books on politics and society. He was a known figure in Britain for basically his literary genius, really.
Yeah, and somebody was on the call yesterday said that she lived in Hackney, been to C.L.R. James Library several times, but didn't realize it was named after a real person until she came on the thing yesterday.
Oh, wow.
So, she said, yeah.
Fantastic. So this is us publishing one of C.L.R. James's works. You can see it's a historic work because it's called Negro Revolt, but he's basically, if we look at the covers, that's Toussaint Louverture, who led the revolution in Haiti. That's what Black Jacobins is about. The first successful slave revolt in the Caribbean. That's Toussaint. That must be Harriet Tubman, led the slave revolt in America and the Underground Railway. Malcolm X, who I think most people know is the radical, the standout radical of that era of the late 60s and 70s in America. Kwame Nkrumah, who led Ghana to independence at a time when Britain did not want to leave Africa. and then Marcus Garvey. C.L.R. James, when he was younger in Trinidad, worked with a lot of Garveyites. There was a very strong Garveyite movement in Trinidad. And then, of course, Sir Jonah Truth, one of the slave leaders. So this just charts how Black people have consistently fought back against, first of all, slavery, then colonialism, then imperialism and racism in America and in Africa and the Caribbean.
Can you still buy this book? Is this book still out?
No, because Bernardine Evaristo is getting some of the older books that are out of print published, we sent this to her, and I'm hoping it's one she will consider getting republished. She's republished C.L.R. James's Minty Alley, but I'm hoping that she will. But I mean, I have copies, of course. The Race Today published this book. Okay. We published small pamphlets and books, and this is one that we published.
And this is another one.
Yeah, so this is Darcus's looking at how the British police, who were known as the lovely Bobby on the beat, someone who you could chat to. There was this mythical character on television called Dixon of Dock Green, and he's showing that the police have become more and more militarized. And now, as far as the Black community is concerned, they are Babylon for their violence. So this cover just shows from the Bobby to the special patrol groups, which eventually do kill somebody in Southall. But what this charts in Britain is how the issue of policing and the issue of policing against Black people, from when it started, from when we arrived in the late 50s, 60s, right through to current times, and points to different moments when that struggle was victorious, wasn't victorious, the issues that were raised, and basically where we are today. And that has recently been reprinted. So you've got the older version of the cover there, but that book has been reprinted.
And I suppose when this comes out, this is one of the first books by a Black person here about the police and their racism?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. This is popping into his broadcast career.
Yeah. So this is Darcus now, who's gone into television with something called the Bandung File. The Bandung conference was where it's the first conference where people from what we call the third world, from Africa, from India, and all the Caribbean meet together in a conference called the Bandung Conference. So Darcus and Tariq call their program the Bandung File. Tariq, of course, is a famous left-wing person of Pakistani origin. Darcus is of West Indian origin, and they then produce a program called the Bandung File, and they travel all over the world to talk about the issues not only going on in Britain but also abroad. And President Nyerere, if anybody knows about Nyerere, is one of the first leaders to say that he isn't going to follow the colonial model. He is not going to have a parliament like Britain. He's not going to have the same structure of colonialism in something called the Arusha Declaration, and he makes villages which are more like cooperatives called the Ujamaa cooperatives. So he's probably, I'm trying to think of another African leader, Nkrumah slightly, but he absolutely says, if we're to be successful, we have to completely disown the models of government and society that the British have imposed on Africa. And so he's having a conversation with Darcus and Tariq, who are asking him how his experiment, really, which it was about around the Arusha Declaration, how it's going.
Is Tariq Ali still alive?
Yeah, Tariq is going to be there tomorrow. Tariq is going to, on Saturday, Tariq is going to be talking about the Bandung File, and they're going to be showing this film as well. They're going to be showing parts of this film.
Wow, okay. And that's at the BFI this Saturday from 11 o'clock to 7 p.m. bfi.org.uk, bfi.org.uk, and that's a physical real life event. You have to come out your house and attend it.
Yeah, and Tariq will be there to talk about this.
Okay.
So now, because of uprisings, more people know about New Cross, the New Cross massacre, and the fire, and the demonstration in response to that, to the fire, and to the fact that official society absolutely ignored what had happened to these young children who'd been burnt to death in this fire. And this pamphlet, again, it's been reprinted again, I think by New Beacon, really just details what happened, what our response was, the political organization that went into the demonstration, how part of the political campaign was to look after the parents, to help raise funds for the funeral. It shows how a whole community mobilized to support the family and friends of the victims, but also how a whole community mobilized to protest and to let Britain know that this was a step too far. And then you can see when it was one. What's that now?
And can you remind us as to the regularity with which Black people were firebombed in the 80s? Because people are online from Russia and Australia, they might not know about the situation Black people at that time.
Okay,
so just tell us a bit.
No, of course. So New Cross is in southeast London, and in that area, a group called the National Front were very, very strong. And there was another organization called Column 88, and they were absolutely opposed to the presence of Black people in Britain. They were against immigration. They kept their major chant was send them back, send them back. And they then almost had a military campaign against Black people to terrorize them, to try to force us to leave and to make it clear that we weren't wanted. And in that area in particular, they had firebombed a youth club called the Moonshot. A theatre company that was based in the Albany in Deptford were putting on plays that had multicultural themes and actors and actresses. So they firebombed the Albany. And they, on individual homes, they would throw petrol bombs. In Brixton, they firebombed a bookshop in which one of the members of Race Day Collective, or then he was a Panther. The Panthers had a bookshop. They firebombed that, and he had to jump from the top floor window. And so they were lots of acts of terror. In Bradford, outside of England, and the East End, they killed somebody called Altab Ali, a young Asian guy, and would regularly just be on the street with knives late at night, stabbing up young men from India and from Pakistan. So there was a whole reign of terror, of fascist terror in Britain at that time. And so when the fire at New Cross happened and the police originally said that it was a missile that was thrown in, there was no doubt in people's minds that this was an attack of nature, that it was an attack. And this is what caused the absolute outpouring that came around the issue of the New Cross fire. And the media did not cover it except the local paper. Officials said nothing, even though there was fire in a disco in Northern Ireland at the same time, and they sent messages to the family. The New Cross parents didn't get any message of condolence. So there was real rage and anger at how we were treated over this issue, and that's why there was this huge demonstration through the streets of London for 8 hours to protest what had happened, but also in solidarity with the families of the New Cross victims.
Yeah, I should also mention at this time, racial attacks are not recorded by police as racial attacks. They will say it was thuggery or general violence or hooliganism, but it won't, even you get called the N-word, then stabbed, then they call the N-word again, it would not be marked down as a racial attack. That did not happen. Well, I was not normal until the late 90s for it to be recorded as a racist attack. They were just ignored, basically.
Yeah, and the other thing we have to say is that whenever the police, Farouk recalls when the police came out to the firebomb, they weren't even interested in collecting evidence or anything. Yeah. It was just, oh, okay, are you all right? That was the end of it. They were not interested at all.
Yeah. And this is the march itself.
Yep. So this is the huge demonstration. You can see so many young people. There were older people too, school children who'd climbed over walls from schools, people who just left colleges. And the reason the march got so big was as the march is making its way through London for 8 hours, any Black person or most Black people who are seeing the march are just joining it. Shopping, coming out of shops, see the march and join it. People are on buses, they get off buses and join the march. School children join the march. So as the march goes along, it starts off huge, but as it moves, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. The ranks just swell.
And Darcus run this is that he's helped to kind of organize it, plan it, coordinate it, and he's actually on the march himself on a truck, kind of like acting like a general. Is that correct?
Yeah, at the front. Darcus is on the truck at the front. Darcus, we formed the New Cross Massacre Action Committee, And John LaRose is the chair, and Darcus is one of the leading spokespeople at press conferences, and also is one of the key people who goes around the country organising for people to come on the march. So he goes to Bristol, to Birmingham, to Liverpool, to Wales. He goes everywhere where people are organising meetings for him to speak. So this is a national march in the sense that people come down from all over England to join this march. This isn't a London march. They come from everywhere. Black people come from everywhere to join this march. And the racists are the headquarters for the New Cross Massacre Action Committee. So we're coordinating, you know, how many coaches are coming down. If people want speakers for events, providing speakers for events. If people want more information, we produce leaflets. We're talking to people. People want to know what the latest is in relation to the investigation of the fire or when the inquest is going to be held. We're providing that information. So it was a time when we were really active, and this was really our sole concentration. So the Black People's Day of Action it is.
Okay, and this is just a bit about preserving that memory and that legacy. So Black History Watch did something with Tideway, where we're building a super sewer, and they have a huge site next to Blackfriars Bridge, and we suggested there be some sort of recognition of the Black People's Day of Action 81, and they agreed to it, and they put up these free billboards right at the intersection of the embankment and Blackfriars Bridge, and these billboards tell some of the story of the Black People's Day of Action. You can see some pictures right there. And these billboards will be there for probably 2 years, if not longer. So right now there's this permanent recognition of this march and the site of Blackfriars Bridge with those billboards there, which will be there for roughly 2, maybe 3 years or so. And that's come out of, you know, activism effect.
Okay, and the important thing about Blackfriars Bridge is that when we're negotiating with the police for the route of the march, they're trying to persuade us not to come into the City of London. They didn't mind us coming up to Blackfriars Bridge, but they did not want us to cross the bridge. Finally, because of the strength of they know they have to cross the bridge, but on the day itself, they have a cordon right across Blackfriars Bridge to prevent us from crossing it. And this is where the truck and the young people at the front just break through the police cordon, and the march just goes straight through and straight over Blackfriars Bridge into Fleet Street, onto the Houses of Parliament and onto Hyde Park, which is the route that we had wanted to do.
Interesting. And this is about the book from Pearson, which we worked on as well. And this is the book that features the Mangrove Nine and Frank Critchlow and partner Susu Boxhand, Baron Baker, the struggle to live in Notting Hill against racial attacks. So it's all in this Pearson GCSE book, which you can actually buy for yourself. We can use it in schools. And it's the first time you're able to study some of this history we're talking about now at GCSE level. And of course, on the front, you have the amazing Claudia Jones, who is another activist that is kind of beginning to get the respect she deserves in the 21st century.
Yeah.
And that's a section from the book I mentioned before, referencing the Mangrove and Frank Critchlow and that struggle for equality that took place here. Because if you go to school in England, you normally talk about American civil rights. So you learn about Luther King, Malcolm X in America, but you don't learn about Baron Baker and Darcus Howe and Frank Critchlow and Alfred Jones Quanti in this country, even though their struggles were equally significant. And of course, they're even more relevant because they took place in this country. But from now, you can get that GCSE exam book and study it at school. Oh, now I can see Mr. Howe in the white shirt there, but
yes.
There's a much more famous person in the center in a very kind of African shirt. Tell us a bit about this, please, Leila.
So this is when Nelson Mandela comes to Brixton. And the person whose hand is shaking is Darcus's brother, Stafford.
Oh.
So there's Darcus's brother, Stafford, who's actually holding his hand, somebody's hand. I don't know if it's Nelson's hand, actually. And then Darcus, of course, is in the background, and we meet Mr. Mandela. He comes to the recreation centre and meets Darcus and talks to Darcus. But the day Nelson Mandela came to Brixton, I can tell you that was just amazing. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And apparently he said he wanted to come to Brixton because he'd heard of Brixton's history of resistance in 81 and therefore wanted to come. So that's Darcus standing there and Darcus's brother actually shaking his hand.
And this is what, 1991, something like that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely early 90s, definitely.
This is a short clip which kind of encapsulates some of what we've heard so far, because Darcus Howe lived a very long life, and 2 hours is not really enough to give him the whole justice. That's why we have a whole session on Sunday from 11 to 7 p.m. But this gives you a little flavor of some of the stuff we discussed in the last hour and a half or so.
I'm sitting opposite a man. He knows nothing. He talks all the time. The result is he's a trenchant buffoon. He has no idea how to present television shows. He looks ridiculous in that fashion wear. He swans around all the time hoping that people will recognize him, when in fact nobody's even remotely interested. He's taking up enough time on this show already, and he hasn't even opened his mouth. Darcus Howe. Sorry, that's the introduction to Robert Elms. Sorry, do you know Robert Elms? I've just read out the introduction to Robert Elms.
Heroic and uncharacteristic restraint from Darcus Howe, a formidable civil rights campaigner and broadcaster. Back in the 70s, Howe was more than a match for the Met when he and others were charged over disturbances in West London following police raids on a restaurant. Officers told the Old Bailey they'd seen Howe orchestrating a crowd to throw stones at them.
Where did you see all of this? We were in an observation van. I said, bring the observation van. The lawyer said, Darcus, please, exhibits are towards sword. I said, I have nothing to lose. Bring the van. So they bring the van, and there were these slits at the back. There are 4 policemen seeing the same thing from the same slit. So I measured it quietly while the judge and they were wrong the side, and went home, cut out a piece of paper, foolscap, the size of the slit, recalled the witness, and said, tell me how 4 of you could see the same thing at the same time through that slit. He said, my eye was here, Reed's eye was here, Roger's eye was here, and the next eye was here. So it was your face. And that is what eventually broke the spirit of the prosecution.
Darcus absolutely, by defending himself, was the star of the show out of the 9 defendants. And with Shakespeare quotations and all sorts of things, he stood up in the dock and was extremely impressive.
Darcus was a fearless warrior in the struggle against racial injustice in this country. People talking about civil rights movement. There was no civil rights movement in this country. There were anti-racist struggles were being waged, and Darcus was at the heart of that. He was at the center of it.
No one got a free pass from Darcus Howe, who went on to be a high-profile and punchy broadcaster. Being an A-lister was no guarantee of an easy ride, as LaToya Jackson found out.
The other story I want to tell you is about a family of 9 children who had talent, but made it to the top because of terror and violence from parents driven by ambition.
But he met his match in comedian Joan Rivers on Radio 4.
Since black offends Joan, I will make
Black, it... Wait, no, just stop right now. Black does not offend me. How dare you? How dare you say that?
Can we just say that you don't think Joan is a racist, and then perhaps we can move on?
Damn right. I will not continue.
I don't know whether she's a racist or not. I don't care.
You said the word black offense?
Normally,
That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Normally, I wouldn't ever meet you in my life.
No, nor would I choose to meet you.
Howe was in demand as a commentator on issues of race and identity, whether discussing symbols of Britishness.
I love England. I like being here. I like living here, but I'm not a patriot. You could like the country. I love the countryside. I get along beautifully with English people. We are part of a space, but I am not patriot.
Or the background to riots in 2011.
Did you have a sense that this was going to happen?
Absolutely.
Why?
I have a grandson who is 15 and who cannot count the number of times he was stopped and searched.
I think Darcus, in a way, more than anybody else, acted as an intermediary. He still had the trust and confidence of the black community, but to some extent at least, he had the trust and confidence of the police as well.
Utterly unbiddable, his own man, Darcus Howe wouldn't let anyone off the hook, no matter how celebrated.
We read the nation's headline, Tiger Woods, I am not black. Just as we were coming to grips with our new hero. Hang in there, brothers.
So that was a little clip about Darcus Howe over the last several decades. Any comments from you, Leila?
it was I do remember it. I'm not sure Darcus had the trust of the police at all, though. I mean, that's Inspector Paddock, who said that Darcus. I'm not sure that that's at all. But the comment that he was fearless, he's courageous, and that he absolutely was his own person and stood up on the issue of race and for equality. That is without question, Tony. That is without question. And people to me stop me and say, we wish we had Darcus now, because there is not that kind of spokesperson now for the Black community at all.
So you got two books here. So can you tell us, because people often get confused, is this the same book or is it two different books?
It is the same book, but with different introductions. So the first one is the hardback edition that was produced by Bloomsbury, but at the insistence of the authors, they asked them to make it cheaper and to make a more accessible paperback copy. Right. So in fact, there's a third version out now because both of these are out of print. So there's now a third version of the book, but it's more or less the same book. There's just slight difference in photographs, introductions to all of them, but the content about Darcus is the same.
And just out of interest, did Darcus actually write his own book, his own autobiography?
No, not at all. So this book was written over a period of years. The two authors would come to our home. They would had done extensive research. I have to say, this was a real lesson of when people take things seriously, as many of our Black writers are now. Robin Bunce is from Cambridge. Paul is a radical lawyer, and they would research different aspects of Darcus's life. They would come with preset questions, and it was all recorded on an Apple iPhone over a series of sessions, and then the book was written that way. But Darcus never wrote his own book. Like CLR did not write his own biography, his own autobiography either.
And can you remind us, because you mentioned it yesterday, but for those who weren't here yesterday, Darcus Howe's archive, his collections, they're housed in Columbia, is that correct?
Columbia University in the United States, because Bobby Hill, the Jamaican academic who wrote the seminal work on Marcus Garvey, he was able to get CLR James's archive, and Columbia housed CLR James's archive. And in Bobby's view, and in many people's view, Darcus is the direct descendant of not only CLR James by blood, but by politics and by ideology and philosophy. And so Bobby asked Darcus if he would sell his archive to Columbia in order that it could sit side by side with CLR James to show the continuity of CLR's politics and work in the 30s, 40s, and 50s through to Darcus's work in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. So Darcus's archive is in Columbia, but the good news is that we're in negotiation with Columbia to get it digitized. And so you'll be able to learn about Darcus's life in context as well, hopefully online in next year.
Brilliant, that sounds great. Again, you mentioned this yesterday, but let's mention it again today, for those who don't know.
Okay, so this is the anthology of Race Today. When Darcus died, a group of us formed a small collective and decided that the way we could honor Darcus initially was to produce an anthology of the articles of Race Today. So not all these articles in this anthology are written by Darcus by any means. As you can see, it says who some of the writers are beyond, but it gives you an idea of what Race Today stood for. Race Today, of course, long out of print and is only available in people's collections like George Padmore, like the Black Cultural Archives. So this was a way to make Race Today accessible to new generations. And we published it, and then COVID hit us. So we weren't able to do the speaking tours, both here and in the United States, of which we've been offered that we hoped. But I must say, since the McQueen documentaries, there's been a whole new interest in the radical movements, the fight for equal rights and justice in Britain that took place, to know that, you know, the generation to which I belong, we did not stand still. I mean, we did a lot, a great deal, and we did it by ourselves. We were self-organized, we relied on ourselves, and we did it collectively. So much emphasis is put on individuals, and this individual did this, and individual did that. We grew up in the era where we believed we had to do it with others. So this is the work of the collective brought now to a new generation.
Okay, great. And this is another collective, a legacy, and you're one of the organizers for this particular collective?
Yes, so there's a small group of us, as I've said. We've formed the Darcus Howe Legacy Collective. One of the things that I've talked about is to get Race Today digitized, because Race Today will be part of Darcus's archive that's being digitized, and also to do other things around this, an anniversary of his death, which is next year. It's 5 years next year, so we're hoping to put out an edition of Race Day commemorative issue in honor of Darcus, and other things as well. I mean, I've done quite a bit of speaking around the work of what was going on in the 70s and 80s, just in order to keep his legacy alive, really.
Okay, brilliant. And speaking of legacy, this is taking place tomorrow. We're showing us the BFI South Bank. This is a physical event, in person, real life. And we're showing a rare film from '69, where Darcus Howe is on TV challenging the Met Police on their record of brutality and racism. So it's a really interesting watch, and it's very rare because it's from '69. Some of that stuff is not even in certain archives now, but it's in our archive, so we're going to show it on Friday. So it's a real event, in-person event, 5th of November, 6:30. And then, of course, we have the whole day of films on Saturday from 11 until about 7 o'clock in the evening. We're showing films from the, well, about 40 odd years, really, of some of Darcus Howe's work, in particular the TV work, but also you're going to have people who were working with him at the time, other activists on stage discussing his life, his work, his legacy, his influence on them, and other things as well. So that's a whole day of events at the BFI South Bank. Physical, in-person, tickets are £6.50 or something like that. So all you got to do is go to the BFI website, which is bfi.org.uk. Just go to bfi.org.uk and look for African Odysseys or Darcus Howe. It should come up. We got a walk coming up this weekend looking at Black History of Theatre. We have another event, online event. This is a free event also, looking at a Black female conservator who maintains 300-year-old works of art. So that's her job in that show. You can check that out on the 18th of November. If you're interested in superheroes, we have an event looking at the Black history behind a lot of Marvel superheroes, as created by Stan Lee. That's coming up next Friday. And also we have another event looking at Black civil rights, in particular locations and organizations that are active in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and the 80s as well. So that's another unusual event, which you can check out if you so desire. Just go to our website or go to Eventbrite page and log on for your ticket. At this point, we're going to take a few questions for Miss Hassan Howe. We've got about, let's say, 15 minutes or so. So let's take a few questions for Miss Howe. Go over here. Simon says, did Darcus reject a knighthood? Did Darcus reject a knighthood?
Darcus was never offered a knighthood, but if he had been, he would have rejected it, definitely. His son has an OBE, and he was happy for his son to be recognized with an OBE, but Darcus was not the sort of person who was going to be offered an honor by the British government. I can assure you of that. He was a thorn in their side, always.
Okay. And someone else is asking, can you say a bit more about what he thought could be achieved through cricket in South London? It's from Michael. What he thought could be achieved politically and culturally through cricket in South London?
I'm not sure. I mean, Darcus, cricket was, like CLR, believed that cricket was an art form, because of course they're traditionally from the West Indies at that time, where cricket was king. I don't think that's the case now. They believed that the way the game was organized, the contributions of each individuals made for a particular relationship. He played for Relton Cricket Club himself, which was the cricket club that was associated with Relton Road Youth Club. But I've never talked to him about what he thought it could achieve in South London, so I'm not going to really go down the road of pretending I do know.
All right, Michelle says, Mrs. Howe, you equally contributed to your husband's legacy. What are your thoughts on wives of activists who do not get the recognition they deserve? How would you like your legacy to be remembered?
Right. So first of all, I have to say, in the last year or so, I've had a lot of recognition, primarily because of the work on television, and because I suppose of how I view individualism and the need to be collective, I'm not really too concerned about how about my legacy in that sense. I'm not sure really that I'm that bothered, to be honest. I do what I do because I believe in it. And if other people want to recognize me and do something about that, that's fine with me. But I don't do it for recognition, and I'm not really bothered about that really going forward, I must say.
I think there's a friend of yours, Stuart Taylor, says, "Dear Leila rather, what would convince you to write your autobiography, Stuart Taylor?"
So it's difficult, isn't it? Because the more I talk, and I keep getting asked this, you have to tell your story. You have to tell your story. So I think just time and space, because I think I know my story, and then I meet people who tell me things about myself that I've completely forgotten. So I think what would take it I'd have to take a year off, and really, because part of my story is in Africa as well. It's you know, in completely different society. I would have to take time and space and be able to do it. It isn't something I could do currently with all that I'm doing. So time and space, I think.
Margaret says, Leila, you're a valuable library. Thank you for the engaging way in which you've shared your wealth of knowledge, and of course for your work with the archives.
Thank you, Margaret.
And someone else says, this is absolutely amazing. I'm so proud that my niece and nephew will be able to learn about Black British history. That is from June. Is there a link to Linton's poem New Cross Massacre? Well, if you just type it into your search engine, I'm sure you can find it.
Yes, it's on YouTube. The New Cross Massacre poem's on YouTube. Most definitely, yeah.
There's about 150 comments in here, Leila, so I'm just trying to pick out the decent questions. Some questions are like paragraphs long, so that's not going to happen. There's more comments than questions so far. I'm just kind of scrolling through them. Let me just check if there's any new ones come in. Oh, here we go. Davina says, what did you think? Oh, no, it's not Davina. It's Michelle. Michelle says, what did you think of Small Axe and its depiction of the Mangrove situation?
So generally, I thought for what it did, Small Axe was really quite incredible. But of course, I'm in the role of super critic, aren't I? And I thought Malachi's performance was brilliant, but I don't think he actually got the power of Darcus, because if Darcus was in a room, you could not overlook him. Malachi got the intellectual side of Darcus, but he didn't get that kind of the depth and power of him. The person who portrayed Frank, again, knowing Frank, you can see where, you know, it was more impressions than they got to the kind of heart of the personality, I thought. But overall, I really don't have nothing more than a commendation, because it was the first, really. There'll be others, but for a first attempt, I thought it was quite brilliant. I can see some of the questions myself. Should I answer them, Tony?
Yeah. You've
okay.
got another 5 minutes or so.
It's gone, but there was one I saw. I saw one that asked if you could get Bradford Black and Race Day online. No, that's part of our digitization project that the collective is working on now. So hopefully next year, in conjunction with Columbia University in the United States, you will be able to see Race Day online. And then we'll be raising money to catalog it, so that if you went in and said, want to know about these struggles, you'd be able to find it. It's a really long-term project to really get Race Day up and get it catalogued so that it's easy for people to use. And that's what the Darcus Howe Legacy Collective is kind of dedicating its time and efforts and energy to.
Yeah, Pauline asks, is there a New Cross Parents Committee? Is there a New Cross Parents Committee?
So I think some of the parents meet, but we must be aware that some of the parents have now passed. the ones, I mean, Mrs. Gooding was in the program. I think that there are just a few of the parents who are still alive, but I'm not sure that they're in a committee. That I think they might be in touch with each other, but some of the parents have passed on since.
All right. Karen says, did Darcus have a legal background? Did he join a barrister's chambers?
Yep, Darcus joined the Middle Temple, but he didn't stay because he then got active in black politics in Notting Hill. But yes, he did study law, and he did join the Middle Temple.
Okay. All right, cool. We're gonna wind it up now. So thank you for attending, those of you from around the world, as well as you from the UK. Don't forget, we have a whole day of films at the BFI South Bank, and this section, or this session rather, has been recorded and will be put up on our YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is just youtube.com/Black History Walks. It's youtube.com/Black History Walks. Also, if you check out our website, which is just blackhistorywalks.co.uk, you'll find other stuff coming up, as well as events like this one. But I have to say thanks very much to Leila Hassan Howe for your fantastic memory and your really engaging stories. It's been brilliant. So thank you very much, Leila.
Thank you, and thank you, everybody. And thank you, Tony, for putting this on. And I hope to see some of you at the BFI on Saturday and tomorrow evening as well. Be nice to meet some of you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Bye for now then. Ciao.
Bye. Thank you.